Hello, welcome. We are doing kind of going back and covering some of the lectures from the junior seminar that were already covered in class, but I wanted to do videos of them mostly to help students in terms of studying for the end of the class and just for kind of recapping. So the lecture before we did the process lecture, the lecture before that was the concept lecture. And so this lecture is about a number of things related to concept. And fundamentally, it's going to lead us to thinking about how do we develop our concepts, how do we develop ideas, how do we know a good idea is a good idea, and how does artwork become concept focused. But before we get there, we're going to need to spend a little bit of time talking about what we mean when we say that artwork is conceptual. What is conceptual artwork, and how does the movement, the time period of conceptual artwork or concept art relate to our goal of learning to be more focused on our concept and more thoughtful about concept in our artwork. So, like I said, first of all, we need to talk about what is conceptual art, or what are some of the various definitions of conceptual art, because when we talk about conceptual art, we talk about a lot of different things. We use lots of slightly different definitions of conceptual art, and to a certain degree, when we talk about conceptual art, what we ought to refer to is a very specific time period of artwork from the late 60s through about the mid 80s, an artwork that is primarily about the idea that art is fundamentally a concept, sort of artwork that's trying to take the objectness and take um, the materialness out of art and make people really aware of how art is fundamentally about the starting idea. So but there's lots of other things that we mean when we say conceptual art. Today, when we see artwork, we often really, what we mean is we mean artwork that seems to have a heavy idea, like any artwork where the concept seems to be a very important part of the piece, we will describe as conceptual. So keep that in mind, that those two things are not exactly the same. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the development of conceptual art in the 60s and 70s, but that's not the only definition that people use. I think another definition that's important to deal with is the fact that in a lot of graduate programs, the approach to students developing their body of work is quote unquote conceptual. And by what I mean by that is that the programs direct students to really think about focusing on what it was they wanted to communicate, the starting concept, really kind of analyze that, and then make the decisions about how they're going to communicate that, sort of separate from any concerns about what kind of artwork does the student want to make. So kind of putting the concept ahead of all other aesthetic issues approach, and also a very visual communication focused approach to art making or to art education. And so that's also a different definition of conceptual art. Um, and they're all to a certain degree valid. So anyway, let's start with, like I said, the late 60s, early 70s, and there were a number of artists who were making artwork that at first people didn't have any words for, but people started to call things, conceptual art. And I think the first thing to understand is that conceptual art is part of a larger movement in the art world in the late 60s and the early 70s, which was this kind of anti-form movement. Artists seeking ways to eliminate commercialization, eliminate commodification, like the artwork becoming a property that could be sold. And one of the ways to do that is to make your artwork just be the idea. So Sol LeWitt, in some ways, epitomizes this in that he made works that some of them were actually pared down just simply to the commands, to the artwork. He made pieces, wall drawings, similar to this wall drawing that we're looking at here, where the artwork was created in his studio. He created the whole drawing step by step, and as he was making it, he recorded all the processes, all the steps. He wrote them down, and then by the time he was done, he destroyed the artwork that he made, but he had like a 30-page, 40-page list of instructions on how to recreate the drawing, and that's what he mailed to the gallery, not the piece itself, but the instructions on how to make the piece. So in a way, it's very much like a form of coding, a form of computer coding. He didn't create a thing, he created a set of instructions that makes the thing happen. And and the point is that it removes the object, but another point is that it makes you really aware that it's the step-by-step decision making, the step-by-step concept or ideas that are the real core of the artwork, not the physical thing itself. Here's some more Saul LeWitt pieces. He did make handmade pieces as well, just so you know. So at the same time in Italy and Europe, there were other things going on, and Piero Manzoni is a good example of an artist who was coming at this same idea. He was less trying to fight the idea of form, the idea of trying to remove the stuffness from artwork, right? The commodification, the commodity aspect of artwork, make it, remove it from being an object. He was more concerned with attacking the artist, trying to deflate the status of the artist, and he started to make these pieces where he mocked the kind of the privilege and esteem that artists are given. So he started to make some pieces called The Breath of the Artist, where he blew into a balloon and then sold the balloons. And the idea was that you weren't actually buying a balloon. What you were buying was the breath of the artist who filled the balloon. He did that with other bodily substances until he reached kind of the zenith of this idea, where he made pieces that were the excrement of the artist. And so, and these are canned, and they're beautifully canned, and they are owned in collections by many famous museums around the world. John Baldessari is a California-based artist, an American artist, and kind of about the same time period, starting as Saul LeWitt. And he was originally a painter, and at a certain point in his career, he realized that he was not a great painter, though he was trained as a painter. And so he did this performance piece where he took all the paintings that he made and he brought them to a crematorium and he burned them all. He cremated them. And this was an act to try to prove to himself that he was never going to make another painting. He was instead going to make more conceptual artwork. And one of the major pieces he made after that, like immediately after that, was this piece called I Will Not Make Any More Boring Art, which originally was just a paper piece, but then he expanded that to a gallery installation where in a gallery, on every single wall in the gallery, he filled every wall with the phrase, I will not make any more boring art, over and over again. Here's another example, Chris Burden, kind of also a California artist and of the similar time period. Chris Burden, in his early stage, was much more of a performance artist. And in a way, performance art is part of this movement, both because it's part of the whole anti-form movement. If the artwork is a thing the artist does without making a thing, then that is essentially anti-form. But also performance art is a form of conceptual art, or often can be. And for Chris Burden, it definitely was. So he had himself shot, as we read in our textbook, and he had himself crucified to his Volkswagen Beetle. And we talked about that a little bit in class. And the piece that we're looking at here at the bottom of the slide on the right hand is a piece from a show he had, I think at the LA County Museum, where there were these kind of like these elaborate toy constructions, kind of like the world's greatest Matchbox car set that he made as kind of pictures of the traffic of Los Angeles. So Richard Long is another artist, a British artist,